Now, we've seen that in App.js, they import app.css, a file that's already there. So it's common to create a CSS file for each component and basically just style that component's stuff in that file. Now, there's nothing magic about that. I could style the entire app in app.css and it would work just fine. Or I could style the entire thing in main.css and it would all work fine. Or even do the whole thing inside sidebar.css. As long as it's imported at some point, it's just part of the whole CSS of the whole thing. It's just a way to keep your code organized. There are ways of actually restricting those styles to that one component. But that's not the way this is working. So we can just put some style in app CSS and it should work fine. So how about we do that? Let's just put some stuff in there. So in Slack, I'm going to paste a big mess of CSS. And I'm going to put all that stuff inside App CSS. App CSS right now has some crap that just came with Create React App. I'm going to delete all of that. I'm going to paste all this in. So here's what's going on. I'm importing a couple of Google fonts, or Font 01 and Oxygen. Ooh, and we haven't talked about Font Awesome yet. That's right, because we didn't do it on Tatum Tots. I'm importing another font called Font Awesome, which I got off of CDN.js. Remember CDN.js? Let's go look at that. CDNJS.com. Let's look up Font Awesome. Font Awesome, as soon as I type font. Okay, the latest version they have on here is 4.7. I happen to know there is a 5.0, but 4.7 is actually on the CDN, and that's fine for our purposes. So all we need is fontawesome.min.css. So I'm going to @import URL, the URL to fontawesome min CSS. And just like the Google font CSS, that's just going to let me use that font. And, well, there's a lot of other stuff in that CSS file too, as we'll see. So we'll talk more about Font Awesome when we actually start using it. But this line will let us use it. So the star selector selects every element on the page. We just say for every element on the page, we use box sizing border box. We don't really need WebKit box sizing border box anymore. Anybody know what that does? If we look at our DevTools, look at the inspector part and just look at anything, and you see this thing showing the box model. We've got our element, our padding, our border, and our margin. Now, when you set the width of an element, how much of that do you think it's referring to? Just the part in blue. It does not include the padding and the border, even though it kind of feels like it should. So if you say this thing should be 100%, and then you give it some padding, well, now you've got a problem, because now it's bigger than 100%. So how on earth do you even fix that? Well, once box sizing was added to CSS, we can fix it like this. Box sizing border box means that the padding in the border will be included in the width. So when you set the width of something, that is the width of everything except the margin, which once you've been doing this a while is how it feels like it should be. So we set the font size of the HTML element, not the body, but the actual HTML element to 10 pixels. Do you know what this does for us? Remember rims, the rim unit? That is based on the font size of the HTML element. So by setting that to 10 pixels, now our rim is 10 pixels. Body, we set the font size to 14 pixels, which seems kind of silly when we just did this. So maybe we should set that to a certain number of rims, but whatever. I set the line height to something, I set the margin to something. So these are just values I came up with screwing around to make this thing look good at some point. Images, by default, I'm going to vertical align middle, fine. So for all headings, I'm going to set the font family to Font 01, which I got from Google, the font weight to 400, the color to that. And .app, I'm going to set the font family to Oxygen, which is another Google font. If it doesn't find that, it's going to use Helvetica. If it doesn't find that, it's going to use Arial. If it doesn't find that, it's going to use whatever sans serif font it can find on your machine. So that's my style sheet so far. So part of the reason I wrap everything inside a div with a class name of the name of that is since, like I said, just putting it in a file called App Css and importing it inside App.js doesn't lock that CSS to that component. It's all still global. So if I want to make sure that nothing outside this component is affected by my style sheet, I could always just put .app in front of all my rules. Then it'll only affect things that are inside that component. Let's refresh our page real quick. Yeah, the font probably changed, but it's pretty subtle. Also, everything seems left aligned now. I think it was centered before, maybe. Okay, neat, beautiful, gorgeous. So style app, the app component. Oops.